illness. Everything's indicating up. In terms of lab testing, and this is what generally goes on at the state lab, which is, for those of you who know by Forest Hills, that enormous concrete building. In typical flu season, we don't do a lot of testing, and we don't do much more than counting. And so specimens are submitted by the sentinel sites, as I described. Long-term care facilities, generally for the elderly, will report to us when they have a cluster, and we'll give them some guidance. And hospitals can submit specimens, but there's not a ton of testing. And until the spring, all of the testing really culture-based, so it took some time. Because of the need to quickly diagnose H1N1 in the spring, a PCR assay was developed, and now all state labs use that assay. And Massachusetts was actually one of the first state labs that were able to implement that assay. And all positive lab results are always reported to us. It's just usually we don't do much with them. I mean, thousands of people get flu, and that's expected, and that's okay. But everything sort of changed with H1N1. So in the very early spring, when the first few cases were recognized, anyone who was reported to have influenza-like illness and who had traveled somewhere where there was confirmed H1N1, so initially it was Texas and California and Mexico, of course, we would test all of those people. And then as we confirmed H1N1 was here and it wasn't just travel associated, it started to circulate in the community, then we said, okay, we don't need to test everyone. Let's just test people who are at increased risk of complications from flu, who are doing very poorly. At that time, that was in the late spring and early summer, there's really very little seasonal flu A or B circulating right now. In the summer, it requires, in order for a specimen to be tested at the state lab, you have to have an epidemiologist approval. So doctors call us, they tell us what's going on with the patient, and then we'll either approve or not approve testing. In the majority of cases, you don't need to know. You know, you treat empirically, you treat with the assumption that it's influenza-like illness. And it's not going to change clinical decision making. In situations where it will, that's where we approve testing. So then, what's going on now, we're still requiring approval, but now we're back to testing for seasonal strains as well. So the lab does that much more work. They're trying to look for seasonal flu A and flu B. And we had our first flu B specimen 2 weeks ago. And then there's the antiviral testing going on as well. So and I should just say that 99% of, nationally, 99% of all influenza A specimens that have been reported to CDC have been H1N1, which is really good because seasonal flu A, which I won't go into too much here, there's actually quite a bit of antiviral resistance. It's resistant to Tamiflu, which is what we're primarily treating H1N1 with. So if there's co-circulation, treatment becomes much more complicated, and then testing might be more important. So things are simpler with it just being H1N1. So the epidemiologists at DPH, basically what we've been doing has changed a lot. And I'll go through a little bit of what we do for case follow-up. We've also had to do a lot of collaboration with our lab, knowing what sort of, you know, right now I have to check in with them every day. And what's your capacity? Can we continue to approve as many specimens as we are approving? And also understanding what they're testing for, how they're reporting results out. Some of the boring things, but which were actually really stressful, was early on, there wasn't a system in place to get these results out quickly. I mean, normally they get mailed to a doctor's office or put, you know, through fax or something. It's, you know, many doctors were demanding phone calls, and so we set up a whole system just to deal with reporting out results, which, again, I mean, when I think about it now, it's one of the more boring things we had to do, but it was probably the most stressful, and we got the most calls about that from doctors. We're also responsible for providing guidance to the general public, to schools, to doctors, to nurses. Basically, we have a phone number that anyone can call 24 hours a day, although we prefer that it's emergencies in the middle of the night. And we talk about infection control measures, treatment, prophylaxis, all of those things. We're also responsible for reporting to CDC, and so we have our usual flu activities that we have to do every flu season, and then we have additional ones. For example, I have to communicate with CDC on a daily basis, telling them what's going on in the state. And then we also do data analysis as well, primarily for internal purposes. And one interesting thing that we were able to do is, I'll go through a little later some of the data on pregnant women and their increased risk of complications, and we were able to do analysis just among our own pregnant cases and see if they weren't getting treated as quickly as they should. And so we were able to put out an advisory based on our own data. So during a typical flu season, we actually don't do too much for regular cases. I mean, you know, we'll get flu and they recover and they're okay. The cases that we do follow up on are pediatric deaths, deaths in pregnant women, unusual cases, like unusually severe cases, so encephalitis or myocarditis or pericarditis following influenza-like illness, clusters in long-term care facility, and that's mostly just to give them some guidance, and then suspect novel flu. So until the spring, it was primarily suspect avian flu cases, and so we would get somewhere between 2 and 6 a year or something, and it would people traveling from certain parts of the world where there were avian flu cases and who had symptoms, and we would go through a whole lot of testing and control measures. But aside from those really severe or sort of unusual situations, we really don't do much. It's more just tracking what's going on and reporting to CDC. But like I said, with H1N1, a lot changed. And so initially, all cases were investigated. And there are 8 epidemiologists who do vaccine preventable disease epidemiology. Then there's another group of epidemiologists in our division who do, we call them the general epidemiologists. So they do everything else that's reportable. So they do foodborne illness, rabies, group A strep, so everything that falls under general epi. They do all of the mosquito-borne illnesses, so West Nile and Tripoli. So things were sort of wild in the spring. We had to train them in flu to be able to take call as well and respond to cases. We eventually were able to train the local boards of health. So in Massachusetts, there's supposed to be a local health department for each city and town. Some function quite well, like Boston Public Health Commission, Cambridge Health Department. Others are really non-existent. And so we didn't have there were so many cases and so much follow-up to do. We tried to get them all trained and able to deal with case follow-up, and some did better than others just because of their capacity. But now, really, we're looking at significant cases, and we care about people who are very severely ill, healthcare workers, pregnant women, and some people who are hospitalized. I mean, the truth is we just don't have the capacity to follow up on everyone, and it wouldn't necessarily tell us anything particularly interesting. And we actually follow up on deaths of any age, whereas normally we only follow up on pediatric deaths. And I'll get into the numbers in a moment for Massachusetts, but we've had 13 deaths so far that are confirmed H1N1. So I'll go through a little bit of national data, some of it old just to sort of remind people what things were like in the summer, which is only a few months ago, and then all some current data. So this is rates of confirmed and probable H1N1. So probable would be your flu A positive, but they haven't done subtyping to confirm that's H1N1. And so really this is in early July. By July, there were cases everywhere in the United States, but it varied by region. And, we had very high rates in Massachusetts. Now, some of this, obviously, to keep in mind, this is a function of several things, as all of the data for flu is, which is that it's a function of what's really going, how much is out there, but then also how much testing is being done. And so, like New York City stopped testing pretty soon after things started getting busy because they just couldn't test everyone. And so once you stop testing, then you stop accumulating confirmed cases. There are commercial labs that do testing, so if you go to your doctor's office and we don't approve you for testing at this lab and your doctor wants to test you, they could send out your specimen. But again, in most cases, it means absolutely nothing. It's more people are just curious to know. So this is now that ILI data from the Sentinel sites for the whole country. And so this is going basically in June, and so this is when things really picked up. So things started in April, and that's when ILI started increasing. And you'll see the more recent, this is just for this year, and so you can see the huge spike this is 3 weeks ago. And so we're at over 7% nationally for influenza-like illness, and normally there's little to none going on at this time. So in comparison, in Massachusetts, we're at about 5% compared to almost 8% nationally. So again, this is a little bit of older data, but the trends are the same. So this is from July, and this is confirmed cases by age group. And as many of you are probably aware, this is really impacting generally younger people. It's essentially the complete opposite of what normally happens with influenza. So the elderly are not impacted very much, and people who are generally 24 and younger are bearing the brunt of the disease. This is hospitalization rates, and so very young children are at very high risk of having complications from flu, and so it's not surprising that the hospitalization rate's high. The other thing to keep in mind is that, and this will come up with the pregnant women data, some people are admitted for, not because they're very severely ill and in the ICU,